Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the second day of our East African Petroleum Conference and Exhibition. We're going to have a discussion on the role of regulators and the national oil companies in promoting socio-economic transformation through exploitation of the petroleum resources. This panel is going to be moderated by Barirega Akankanswa, who is the Executive Director, National Environment Management Authority, NEMA, Uganda. And the panelists on this panel are Mr. Ernest Rubondo, who is the Executive Director, the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, Mr. Edward Kinyua, who's the Director, Oil and Gas, Energy and Petroleum Regulation Authority, Kenya, Mr. Adam Makame, Managing Director of Zanzibar Petroleum Authority, and Lepran Ole Morinat, who is the Chief Executive Officer, National Oil Corporation of Kenya. Mr. Barirega, please come and take over your panel.
A very good morning. All protocols observed. You are most welcome to this session, which is a panel discussion. May I take this opportunity to invite my panelists to come and take their seats in this order. Mr. Ernest Rubondo, Petroleum Authority of Uganda. You are most welcome, Ernest. Mr. Haruna Masebu, Board Member, Energy and Water Utilities Regulatory Authority, United Republic of Tanzania. Mr. Edward Kinyua, Director, Oil and Gas, Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority. Edward, you are most welcome. Mr. Adam Makame, Managing Director, Zanzibar Petroleum Regulatory Authority. Adam, you are most welcome. And lastly but not least, certainly, Mr. Lepran Ole Morinta, Chief Executive Officer, National Oil Corporation of Kenya. You are most welcome. And my rapporteur, Mr. Abiud Masinde from the National Oil Company of Kenya. You can take up the seat nearby so that you can capture all the proceedings. You're most welcome, distinguished panelists. To set off the panel discussion, let me invite you in only 2 minutes to introduce yourselves and what you do, starting with Ernest Rubondo, Petroleum Authority of Uganda. Only 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, distinguished participants. My name is Ernest Rubondo. I'm currently the Executive Director of the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. And as I'll say later, the Petroleum Authority of Uganda is the institution regulating the upstream and midstream oil and gas aspects in Uganda. I've had the opportunity to work in the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, and I've been in the oil and gas sector for Uganda most of the time for over 30 years. I'm extremely privileged to be here, and thank you very much. I look forward to the session.
A round of applause for Ernest. Let's hear from Mr. Haruna Masebu. In 2 minutes, greet the people and tell us what you do.
First of all, I should send apologies of Mr. Haruna Masebu. He was unable to come, but sitting on his behalf to represent him in this panel. My name is Ngosi Mwihava. I'm a board member of the Energy and Water Utilities Regulatory Authority of Tanzania. And I've been in the energy sector for about 30 plus years, working with the government in the Ministry of Energy and Minerals, and then to Vice President's Office Environment and in the Ministry of Water. So I've been in the sector for quite some time, and I hope I'll be able to put on the shoes of Mr. Haruna Masebo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can confirm that already you have demonstrated that you actually fit in the shoes very, very well. You are most welcome, and karibu sana. Let's hear from Mr. Edward Kinyua.
Good morning. My name is Engineer Edward Kinyua. I'm the Director in charge of Petroleum and Gas at the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority of Kenya, which is charged with the regulation of upstream, midstream, and downstream operations in Kenya. I've been in this industry for the last 17 years, 13 of which I've spent as a regulator. So basically what we do is to formulate regulations, laws and regulations, to ensure that players in the sector comply with certain specific standards that have been set. And of course, this is geared towards ensuring that we safeguard environment, health, and safety aspects of the industry. We have to realize that the products that we are regulating are flammable. Oil and gas, we know the aspect of safety in the oil and gas industry is not something we can just gainsay. And I believe this is why we exist as a regulator, to advise government and also to ensure that the players toe the line. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Engineer Kinyua. Let's hear from Mr. Adam Makame.
I am Adam Abdullah Makame. I am Managing Director for Zanzibar Petroleum Regulatory Authority. The main objective or work is regulating all upstream regulatory authority from exploration, development, until decommissioning for the oil and gas sector in Zanzibar. Thank you.
A round of applause for Adam. We've heard from 4 regulators. We have only one regulated on the panel. The regulated. Let's hear from the only regulated on the panel, Mr. Leparan Ole Morinta, Chief Executive Officer, National Oil Corporation of Kenya.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barigega, my fellow panelists, distinguished delegates, good morning. As you have heard, it looks like this was a panel of the regulators. And I come from a community in Kenya that is called the Maasai, who keep cows. But cows must always move with a donkey. And so the donkey is here with the cows. I currently am the CEO of the National Oil Corporation of Kenya, a state-owned oil company, fully integrated, established in 1981, specifically with a mandate to support the Republic of Kenya on all matters relating to oil and gas, starting from exploration to guaranteeing security of supply of the commodity. And before the regulator came, as a direct market participant to influence pricing. And so I'm glad to be here to discuss on how effectively we can participate in economic development for our respective countries as NOCs. Thank you.
A round of applause for Mr. Leparan Ole Morinta. Thank you very much, distinguished panelists, for introducing yourselves to us. We shall now move into the discussion. my dear panelists, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's well known that prudent exploitation of petroleum resources can lead to socio-economic transformation. This is no longer in doubt, as has been seen in countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Norway, among others. Key in achieving this transformation is a balance, a delicate balance between government regulation of the sector, national oil company participation, and investors' interests driven by the need to get good returns on investment. This panel is going to dissect for us how regulators and national oil companies can use their functions to achieve this rather delicate balance and promote socio-economic transformation in petroleum-rich countries. I'm once again Dr. Barire Gakankwasa, Executive Director, National Environment Management Authority, Republic of Uganda. Let's dive into the discussion. My first question will go to Mr. Ernest Rubondo, the CEO, Petroleum Authority of Uganda. Mr. Rubondo, what do you think is the key role of a regulator in promoting socio-economic transformation in the oil and gas industry? Tell us how you perceive the role of a regulator in promoting socio-economic transformation.
Thank you once again, moderator. When I was preparing to participate in this panel, I actually discovered the importance of the topic of this panel, I must say, more than I have had in the past. Because as you can see, it's talking about the socio-economic transformation for the better, I think. And whatever we do, those who are technical, whether you are reviewing a field development plan, those who are economic, whether you are looking at the economics of the production sharing agreement, those who are legal, whether you are looking at the language in the different agreements, we'll all agree that the value of all that work is best manifested in the socio-economic transformation of the people. Because if you don't get there, then however well you did in the other aspects, you can say it has had no value. So I found that this is a very interesting topic. I also thought that it would be important to talk about the two aspects of the topic we are discussing. The regulator. Many of you would know that the governance aspects of the oil and gas sector, and indeed of other sectors, include key important aspects of policy, key aspects of licensing, key aspects of regulation, and key aspects of business. I have been around the world, and I have noted that when you call a regulator in a country, it's not automatic which of those things they are actually handling. I was in the ministry for a long time, and I can tell you that while there, we did policy, we did licensing, we did regulation, and we did business. If you came to Uganda that time and asked for a regulator, the person from the ministry would come, and they would be able to say this. If you go to Angola and you ask who is regulating the oil and gas sector, I would not be surprised if Sonangol came, which is the national oil company of Angola. Even in best practice countries like Malaysia, if you ask the line between regulation and licensing, you'll find that Petronas is covering all of them. I thought it was important to say this so that when we say a regulator, then we have an idea of what is important. The good thing is the different aspects of governance, be it policy, be it licensing, be it regulation, be it the business part, all have strong implications for socio-economic development or transformation. The second aspect was the socio-economic transformation. Of course, you can transform in two directions. You can transform for the worse. You can also transform for the better. My understanding here is that we are talking about social transformation for the better. And you may think that this is a casual consideration, but the world has become very complicated. There are very serious institutions, banks, insurance firms, NGOs, who are currently saying, stop ECOP. Now, we can debate whether those institutions, first of all, those institutions will tell you that they are working for the socio-economic transformation of our countries. As to whether they are working for the positive or negative socio-economic transformation, I'm sure is a debate you can have over a cup of tea. But I think for our discussion today, we shall focus on the positive socio-economic transformation. Now, in Uganda's oil and gas sector, the country has adopted what is referred to as best regulatory practice. And best regulatory practice requires that you separate the policy from licensing and from business. And so in Uganda, the policy is done by the ministry, including the licensing. The regulation is done by the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, and the business is done by the Uganda National Oil Company. The role of the Petroleum Authority of Uganda is very well spelled out in the different legislation. And so our job as a regulator is very well cut out. And it is to regulate the upstream and the midstream, and we don't regulate the downstream yet. And the key outputs, really, what we do is we regulate to ensure that the players are playing in accordance with the legislation. We also regulate to ensure that the players are implementing international best practice. So it's not enough to just say they have gone by the law, but you also need to ensure that they are implementing what is known internationally around the world. And we've had examples of this where we have required the players to actually do things that we have seen in other parts of the world. Other regulators also deal with aspects of competition between the players. I must admit that for us in the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, the aspect of competition between the players has not been very pronounced yet. You can imagine those who regulate the downstream, and I'm sure our colleague will tell us, the competition between the players is very, very important. We do have an aspect of competition, but it's largely on the aspects of procurement and contracting and things like that. It can be more emphasized, but that's also another aspect that the regulator is required to do to manage the competition between the players. Now, the Petroleum Authority of Uganda has a mission, and this mission is to create lasting value using the oil and gas resources, but also ensure that Uganda is an attractive investment destination for the oil and gas sector. Now, attracting investment in the oil and gas sector is a contributor to socio-economic development, no doubt. But you will agree with me that the aspect of creating value is more pronounced to the aspect of socio-economic transformation. Now, because the Petroleum Authority has a mission of creating lasting value, this mission is cascaded through the pillars, the values, the objectives, and the plans of the Petroleum Authority, of the strategic plan of the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. What does this mean? It means that those aspects of the strategic plan have been written in a way that you deliver value. And in delivering value, that's how the aspect of socio-economic transformation then comes in. Now, the aspects of the authority, the work we do, of course, is in areas of resource management, national content, environment management, costs, and so on and so on. These things have targets. They are measured. And so at the end, when you measure them, you are able to see whether you are having positive socio-economic transformation in each of these different areas. For example, if you take in national content, you can look at aspects of skills development. You can look at aspects of employment. You can look at aspects of providing goods and services. You can look at aspects of technology transfer. Outside national content, you can look at aspects of environment management. You can look at aspects of how you plan to produce the resources. And each one of these, you'll be able to know whether you are actually making a contribution towards socio-economic transformation or not. I don't think the time allows me, because if it does, I would have been able to give examples of how the Petroleum Authority of Uganda is measuring the progress that is being made in skills development in the oil and gas sector, the progress that is being made in employment in the oil and gas sector, and the progress that is being made in the provision of goods and services in the oil and gas sector, and the progress that is being made in technology transfer. However, the distinguished participants have an opportunity, because these are things that have been made in other presentations, and I will not repeat them because we don't have a lot of time. I, however, would like to say that something, in addition to measuring, there is a very important aspect of setting the targets. It's not enough to just start skills development and measure yourself at the end and see how many skills you have developed. It's extremely important that before you start skills development, you get a target of the skills you want to develop. And in the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, these targets, be they for skills, be they for provision of goods and services, be they relationship with other sectors, are arrived at through professional studies. And the good thing about doing them through professional studies is that you now have evidence-based measurement. If measurement is not evidence-based, I think you may as well throw away the measurement, because you didn't set a target, or if you set the target, it was not based on professional evidence. I think that's the time I have for now. If you'll allow me, I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause for Mr. Ernest Rubondo. Thank you very much for taking us through the role of a regulator in promoting socio-economic transformation in oil and gas industry, the perspective of Uganda. Let's hear from the United Republic of Tanzania. How do you perceive the role of a regulator in promoting socio-economic transformation? What's the perceptions of this subject in our neighboring United Republic of Tanzania?
Thank you, moderator. And I thank you all distinguished delegates, and especially my chairman, the chairman of the EWURA, that's the Energy and Water Utilities Regulatory Authority, Professor Mandosia, but I have my High Commissioner to Uganda, and we have a number of other distinguished representatives from many of the organizations responsible for this subject matter in Tanzania. Having heard from Mr. Ernest Rubondo, actually there will be a repetition, because regulation is global, and historically regulation has been there. Even in Tanzania, the sectors, including the energy sector, which in Tanzania is subdivided into petroleum subsector, but you have electricity subsector, you have water subsector, and the others. These have been regulated, and historically they were regulated under the ministries responsible for those subject matters. So regulation is not new, it has been there, but how efficient, how thorough, that is a question that led to having some of the regulators to make sure that the sustainable energy equation is well implemented. So in Tanzania, as far as petroleum is concerned, we have the upstream regulatory authority, that is the PURA, the Petroleum Upstream Regulatory Authority. They regulate from exploration, all the preliminaries, the geologists know better, up to the wellhead. And then the midstream and downstream is where EWURA is mandated to regulate. And we have been operating under the guidance of the law that establishes the EWURA, but we have other sector legislations, and then we have tools to regulate, which are developed in accordance to the law. So in terms of regulation, we are saying that in order to have sustainable development, we have to ensure what Mr. Bondo has highlighted: efficiency, competition, cost reflectivity, and prudence in whatever we are doing, including the social and the environmental issues. Now, development, as it is defined under the international fora, has to be sustainable. And in order to be sustainable, we have to make sure that what we are doing now considers the needs of our generation, but the future generations. And that's why there is an outcry, as he mentioned, that there are issues of environment. But environment is affected in whatever you do. But how you do it and how do you envisage the impacts is important. So the regulator comes in to ensure that the standards that have been depicted in the laws, but in the regulations and all other guiding documents are observed by both the service providers and the consumers. So as a regulator, we have to make sure that the investors receive the returns of the investments. At the same time, the consumers also have a fair price and a quality service. And it has to be it has to have continuity. So in a nutshell, we are saying the main roles of the regulator basically is to create and maintain a level playing ground for both players, but also to establish, monitor, and enforce standards, as I have said, and to ensure that the industry practice, the good industry practices are implemented by all stakeholders, but also to make sure that the rights and interests of both the developers and the consumers are observed. And at the end of the day, whatever we are doing, we have to make sure that we have a win-win situation. The environment wins, the people wins, the investors wins. So in order to make sure that this happens, the regulator comes in to make sure that all parameters that needs to be looked into are looked into and are done in a very open way. But also we need to create an environment that will encourage investors to continue investing, because if no returns on investment, no investor will come in. So one of the issues that the regulator has to make sure is to ensure that the environment is favorable for both the players, the producers, the consumers, and everything. So I would say that EWURA is there to regulate issues of technical, economic, environmental, and social, including the issues of human rights. And just to conclude, is that we have played a role even in the EACOP, the East African Crude Oil Pipeline Project, that EWURA is mandated to to issue licenses, including construction licenses, has to approve the annual plans of the investors, the players, including the capacity building, including the local content, national content. So basically, I would say what Mr. Rubondo has said is what is happening also in Tanzania, but also to clarify is that Tanzania is a united republic. For those who were here yesterday, the permanent secretary elaborated. So we have the revolutionary government of Zanzibar, which has got its regulators also, the upstream and also the downstream under the ZURA and the ZUPRA. So in the interest of time, I think I should end up there and conclude by saying regulation is very important to make sure that the social, economic, and environmental development has to be regulated to ensure that whatever we are doing is sustainable and also meets the needs of the current generation, but also the future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. A big round of applause for our brother from EURA, from the United Republic of Tanzania. To continue the discussion of the subject, let's hear from Engineer Edward Kinyua. Engineer Kinyua, the general view of a regulator in a common person's understanding is that these are people who whip, people who carry the whip to ensure compliance by those who are regulated. Fortunately, we have one of them here. We shall be hearing from him later on. But what's your view on regulation of the petroleum sector in light of investors' interests? What's your view of the regulation of petroleum sector in light of investors' interests? Are you a carrot holder or a stick wielder? Give us your perspective.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think in terms of the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority of Kenya, we are like a new kid in the block, because the regulation of upstream operations has been sitting with the ministry for a long time under the Exploration and Production Act of 1986. But we have an Energy Act of 2019 which transferred this role from the ministry to ourselves, and ministry was left to do the work of policy. So in terms of regulation, which we've also been doing for mid and downstream for the last 17 years or so, I would sum it up in 3 points. One, our role involves advocacy. The role of regulators nowadays is changing from what you've just called the whip-wielding kind of policeman to a more inclusive and more stakeholder-driven kind of business, because these stakeholders are the ones who are formulating the best practice in the industry. And as you are aware, regulation comes in when we adopt best practice and legislate it in law or put it in form of a standard. And then we say, for this particular industry, it's like the game of football. If we say that we have a new rule in the game of football, then everyone has to follow that rule. So we come in to adopt best practice. I always say that in terms of regulation, government does not bring about laws and industry practices which are strange or alien to the industry. We just adopt what the industry has in place, and if we evaluate it as best practice, then we are able to replicate it across the entire industry. So in terms of advocacy, here, first of all, we are looking at education and awareness creation. Once we domesticate or we adopt a best practice, then it is our role to ensure that this is preached throughout the entire value chain, so that people can know that there's a new way of doing things in town. And then, of course, that comes with sanctions. There are people who may not toe the line, and it's not easy to make sure that everyone toes the line. So there are those people who will be non-compliant, and there are ways that we provide in our regulation to ensure that the non-compliance persons are brought back to the level of compliance. So if we come and, for example, we audit your facility or we audit your operations, we'll find that you fall short of certain requirements in the law and in the standards. So basically, we might give you a corrective action plan, a chance to do a corrective action plan. But of course, it goes to a higher level if, for example, you committed to correct those anomalies within a year, 6 months, or even 30 days, and you are not able to correct them. Then I come to do a follow-up and I find the same issues. And some of them are critical issues to do with safety. So then I go to the second level of sanctions, which may include, I may decide to give you a fine, or I may decide to suspend your license for a while, so that we can be able to discuss on how you're going to bring back your operations back to compliance. If now you go beyond that stage now, then it comes to now the whip, where I may decide now to sue you, or I may decide now to all the same to revoke your operational license. So at least we give you a chance, and it is a discussion between myself and yourself, and we try to drive the reason why we are trying to move you to a certain direction. So it is not that I come as a policeman and I tell you that you have to toe the line. It's a discussion we have between ourselves. I think the other role we have as a regulator is an advisory role in terms of advising government. We do advise the ministry. The ministry dispenses policy to us, but we do advise them. Like, for example, if you look at the Petroleum Act 2019, once an operator submits a field development plan to us, we are supposed to review it for technical and commercial viability, and then we are supposed to advise the ministry, because ultimately it's the minister who commits the country on behalf of government to such a document like the field development plan. So we do play an advisory role, and we also advise on the best practice in the industry. So basically we will have stakeholder meetings with our stakeholders, and that's why I've been saying it's actually a two-way traffic. We are having a discussion between ourselves and the players in the industry. And then lastly is a role of compliance. So once we do advocacy, once we do advisory, then we formulate laws and regulations, then comes to the aspect of compliance, where everybody has to toe the line. And here we are looking at things like ESG. If you have an ESG framework, because as I earlier said, we are dealing with the hazardous products. So these are not products that can just be handled. So we have to have certain guidelines and principles that will ensure that we safeguard our environment and to ensure that we have a sustainable development of these resources. So the compliance aspect now is to ensure that all players in the industry will now follow the set rules and regulations. I think I can sum it up like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Engineer Edward Kinyua, for sharing with us how you do it. It's a mixed carrot stick conversation, continuous improvement, you know, mutual growth between the operator and your and the regulator. Let's hear from Adam. Just taking it from where Engineer Kinyua left it, we all know, because it's common knowledge that operators will always want to maximize returns. Any investor will always want to maximize returns on their investment. So compliance may not necessarily be their priority goal, much as it is an enabling environment for them to achieve their primary goal. In your view, what do you think is the best approach to dealing with non-compliance?
Thank you, moderator. Yeah, as said from member from Kenya, that dealing with the investors as a regulator is not an easy task, as you see, because we have good regulatory regime. Also, we have good legal framework, but implementation of those, when things not going well, it become challenging for regulators. For instance, the big challenges that we can see that the regulator has less capacity compared to IOCs, who is regulated by regulators. And when things not going well, and we want to do a compliance as a regulator, we must be very careful, because while non-compliance taking place, we know that IOCs know that based on our agreement, this implementation, or this what I'm doing, maybe it will not be good to regulators, and he or the investors already has measures to see how the regulators maybe when come and want to take into force how can be away from those measures. So as regulators, we have to first build our capacity. That's, I think, a very good starting point, because when you are supervise someone which has more capacity than yourself, I think it is not easy to supervise, and even during any compliance and any bad things happen, it is not a very good, maybe things can happen. Maybe, for instance, when we have investors and we have already agreed on some issues, and as regulators, we have our regulations. Thus, we have to make sure that the regulation is followed. But at some point, you can see that things are not going very well, but maybe due to the knowledge gap, for most of regulators, they can go direct through the regulation without maybe looking environment which is coming from, and see how these things happen for investors. I think as a regulator, we have to first promote discussion and dialogue with the investors before anything happen, or maybe when see something went wrong, we have to sit together and see investors as our stakeholders, not other parties, to make sure that these dialogues maybe can give a win-win situation and bring us development, and see how these issues can be solved without maybe going to very high non-compliance and wasting most of the time for dealing with maybe IOCs or investors who is not working very well. And also, maybe another things, we have to be to promote transparency and accountability. Each party, regulator and also investors, has to be transparent to one another, and also have to be accountable when anything goes wrong. I think this transparency and accountability should go on both sides in order to make sure that regulator is effectively and efficiently regulate the IOCs, to make sure they are the non-compliance and all things that we see that is not going to be well taken care before things become very bad. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Adam Makame, for giving us the perspectives from Zanzibar Petroleum Regulatory Authority, United Republic of Tanzania. Many thanks indeed. We have discussed regulation and regulators. It's high time we discussed the business itself, because without the business, the regulator has no business, isn't it? So let's discuss the business. Mr. Leparan Ole Morinta. The old school has it that government has no business in doing business. We've grown up hearing that government has no business in doing business. That's old school, I call it, because we've grown up hearing it, but we've not so much witnessed how it works. In your view, what do you think is the key role of national oil companies in promoting socio-economic transformation in the oil and gas sector? Why shouldn't we leave it to private operators? Why should government invest in participation in this business? Have your say.
Mr. Barugega, the starting point with which you came from is quite interesting. But I want to tell the audience and all of us here that petroleum is too important to be left to the market. And those are not my words. In a report published by the World Bank in 2011, titled National Oil Companies and Value, they said petroleum is too important to be left to the market. And so, the assertion is actually not old school, because between 1928 and the 70s, the global oil spectrum was dominated by what we call the seven big sisters. The Essos, the BPs, the Shells, the Chevrons, and whatnot. But with the realization by governments that oil is too important to be left to the market, we have seen the growth of new seven big sisters, led by Saudi Aramco, Petronas, Petrobras, PDVSA, Iran Oil Company, and Sinopec. And so that tells you that national government saw it fit to establish tools of implementation of government policy as a way of transforming their societies. And so what do NOCs principally do? International oil companies are primarily driven by bottom line. Bottom line means shareholder value maximization. It means profits. But oil business is more than just profit. So we come in as a wealth redistributor. We come in to promote economic development through what you would call local content and increasing government take. If you have exploration activities, for instance, like here in Uganda, the government can take a share of that through earning in taxes and the increased tax base, but with direct participation of UNOC as an investor and owning a significant share in that production, then the share of what the Ugandans will get from their oil resource increases. Ordinarily, that would not have come if the business was left to international oil exploration companies. Oil and petrol, just like energy, is a security issue. And so governments use national oil companies to guarantee security of supply. I've had an opportunity to work for an international oil company in the past, and when there was conflict in Sudan, when the Darfur and South and North Sudan war broke out, we closed the business because it was not in our interest, as the IOCs would say, to finance conflict or to fuel conflict. So they exited. In the 1970s, there was war between Pakistan and India, and all international oil companies enforced force majeure. They exited the country because in their policies, they don't fuel conflict. And India did not have a national oil company at that time. It was forced to nationalize those assets so that then India could be sustainable in terms of oil production. And so, more than the business of oil, Petroleum is too important actually to be left to the players. You would also agree with me that oil and petrol and gas is used by governments as a tool of foreign policy enforcement. And most of us relate now very well with the Gulf oil-producing countries. They use it as a diplomatic avenue to measure their relations and to expand their countries' interests through bilateral and multilateral engagements. Last but not least, is that you see the sweetness of the pudding is in the eating. Governments use national oil companies to demystify what you would call information asymmetry. If the exploration companies, for instance, would come to a country, undertake exploration, and bring you a cost and say, we have used this so much billions of shillings, and we would want to recover it through the cost recovery, you would most likely then agree if you have not yourself tried to do it. And so national oil companies also go into exploration as a way of trying to set symmetry in the information and to be used as benchmarks so that then we can audit properly the activities of IOCs. I think if I could stop there and we progress, you would permit me. But before I stop, I just want to recognize the presence of my chairman, who is a former Minister of Energy of the Republic of Kenya in the House, and all the national oil companies represented in this from all the East Africa community countries and from outside. You may also clap for them.
Another round of applause for Mr. Leparan Ole Morinta, who has ably made a case of why states must participate in the business. I think he ably justified why he must stay in his job. And since the government of Kenya is present, I think he deserves to stay in the job. He's doing very well. Now, unfortunately, the debate is becoming sweeter, but the time we have is up. So I've already been warned that the session is already out of time. So I want to propose that those who have comments and questions and issues use the hashtag to continue the conversation on Twitter. These days the discussion continues, it doesn't end here. So we can use the hashtag. All our panelists are on Twitter, and they will be able to respond to you using the hashtag. But I want to open the floor for not more than two. And the first chance will go to Professor Mark Mwandosia, who has done extensive research on this subject. Let's give Professor Mark Mwandosia a chance to have his comment. Professor, the mic is coming. I know professors don't have very many words, so I have no doubt. They are used to teaching in restricted times, so I am sure 1 minute or less will do. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Hello. Hello. Mic check, check. Check 1, 2. Mic check, check.
Thank you very much for giving me this unique opportunity to say a word or two to this august assembly. I've been in the sector for the last 40 years, in the energy sector, water sector, and in regulation. And now I'm the chair of the Energy and Water Utilities Regulatory Authority of Tanzania. I was lucky as a minister, perhaps the only minister in Tanzania, to be responsible for all, the minister responsible for about 4 regulators. It will not happen again because there won't be that many regulators, new regulators. So if I had prepared myself to speak, I would need perhaps 1 hour. But luckily yesterday, somebody introduced me to the assembly by saying that 2 of my students were on the panel and they are permanent secretaries. They have said it all. And Mr. Mwihava, who is a board member of EWURA, who has taken over Haruna Masebu's place today, is my student. So it was very easy for me to say, why don't you go and take Haruna Masebu's place? So he couldn't say no. That's the beauty of being a teacher. Otherwise, I don't have much to say. You didn't want me to say more than what you said. Actually, what I would have wished to say is contained in a book known as Challenges of Regulation in Africa, an empirical approach. It was published last year. I think you can get it if you Google, you'll get it. If you Google Mandosia book, you'll get it. It's one of the few books that I've written. So, that's it. Let me give back the mic to you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to say hello to this August assembly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mandosia. I told you, professors don't waste a lot of time because they know time is money. I'm very grateful, Professor. I will give an opportunity to one more person from the audience if there is a demand. If there is no demand, we shall close off. Okay, you are a very good class that appreciates the limitation of time. Thank you very much. And back to our panelists. I'm going to give you half a minute each to give your parting shots. In no order, starting from here up to the end. Half a minute. As you can see, my bosses are already warning me.
Thank you again, moderator. My parting shot would just be to ask a question to all of us, 2 questions. And the first one is I would like to see a response by show of hands. How many of us have ever been to Dubai or to Abu Dhabi? By show of hands. And my second question is, did you see a Shell, a Total, a Chevron retail petrol station? By show of hands. You saw it. A Total petrol station in those 2 cities. And so my third question is, do you think they would have wanted to participate in those markets? And the last question is, why are they not there?
Thank you very much. I just want to say that the key aspect of the topic of discussion was socio-economic transformation. And you'll appreciate that the discussion we have had has not included an aspect of the money you earn from the oil and gas resources. But you will agree with me that these revenues are actually a big component of the oil and gas sector contributing to socio-economic development. So our discussion on socio-economic development has been restricted to some extent. That as it may, it has also brought out a very important aspect, how you can achieve socio-economic development even before the money arrives. And I don't have time, but I think in Uganda we are witnessing tremendous socio-economic development arising out of the oil and gas sector even before the money comes. And the achievement of this tremendous socio-economic development, of course, has to do with the plans and policies government has put in place, but also has had a very important aspect on the relationship between the regulator and those who are regulated. We are also finding out that those who are regulated, it's very easy to think that it is the investors. But there is another big set of animals called contractors who have to be regulated, and they are not investors. Well, they only invest in making sure they get the contract, but they are an important arm to be regulated. And finally, the best way to ensure that you are regulating well is by also looking inside yourself, because there are a lot of things that you have to do internally as a regulator to contribute or fail socio-economic transformation. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ernest. Thank you very much for the parting shots. Let's get parting shots from Eura.
Thank you once again. I would say regulators are basically referees. They have rules which have already been set, and they would like to ensure that those are being followed by all. East Africa will have to transition to the so-called greener energies. In order to do that, hydrocarbons will still play a role in the equation. So regulators needs capacity, needs patriotism, needs effectiveness to ensure that while we are developing and observing whatever is being agreed internationally, but we are moving in the right way. So I would say that regulation is there to support development in all aspects. And I thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the parting shots. Parting shots from Edward, Engineer Kinyua.
Thank you. In terms of my conclusion remarks, I think I'll talk about two items. One of the items is a participatory kind of regulatory approach, whereby as regulators, we need to ensure that every stakeholder in the oil and gas value chain, including the consumers who are at the lowest end of the value chain, are brought on board in terms of understanding why certain policies or why certain regulatory instruments are developed, and also understanding in their own kind of level of understanding how the oil and gas value chain works in terms of what level of investment the investor has put in place, what level of investment the government is intending to put in place in terms of the enabling work streams, and also to look at how to break the returns, how to communicate the story of how much returns is expected from such an investment and over what period. I think that participatory approach will ensure more transparency, as my colleague had said, and it will ensure that we don't have the conflicts that we have seen over a period of time in the oil and gas industry, especially here in Africa. But in terms of socio-economic transformation, I think we have to emphasize the aspect of local content. And as regulators, it is our role to educate and create awareness or to our people, and also to the industry, the companies that are residing in our countries, and we see how best these companies can be able to benefit from the exploitation of oil and gas resources. The IOCs bring complex technology. They come with the complex investment in terms of the capital. But then how can we benefit as an industry? I was proud to go to Ghana last year, and I was impressed to understand that they have locally made an FPSO themselves, the first, I think, in Africa. And that shows the value of creating awareness in terms of the local content. I think the capability is there. We only need just to drive our people to a certain direction to be able to appreciate that this industry operates within certain standards, and they have to meet those standards so that their goods and services can be acceptable to the IOCs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Engineer Chinyua. Lastly but not least, Mr. Makame. Parting shots.
Thank you, moderator. I have a few words. As a regulator, the door and the point of reception for all investors for petroleum investment in our countries. So my advice is that regulators, we should work professionally, efficiently, and effectively to build the confidence to investors and other stakeholders who want to invest in our countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. A round of applause for all our panelists, and another round of applause for all of you, our audience. You've been a great audience. Thank you very much. It's been a great morning. Back to you, the Master of Ceremonies.
Thank you very much, panelists. We're now going into the second panel discussion, and this is on the future of oil and gas in the face of energy transition. The moderator for this will be my very good brother, Ellison Karuhanga. He's a partner at KAA Advocates. Ellison, if you can step up here and bring up your panel. Just also so you know, we're trying to claw back as much time as we can, so let's be amazingly great while taking care of the time we have.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor and privilege to be here today moderating what I believe is going to be a wonderful panel. If we could have Dr. Victoria Nalule. She's the Chief Executive Officer of NEM Energy. I think that's how I pronounce it, N-E-M. Not name, but NEM. I know some of us say NEM, it depends on where. But she's a wonderful resource in the energy space. I think many of us know her. She's already arbitrated. She's well known for arbitration, I believe, and resolving disputes peacefully or forcefully, depending on the way you choose to have your dispute resolved. She's also an extremely resourceful person in this energy space. She has written, I think, a number of articles and I think books as well, and she'll be a wonderful resource to have. Could we also have NJ Ayuk, the Executive Chairman of the Africa Energy Chamber? I think you all had NJ yesterday, so you know that our panel is going to be very peaceful. There will be a lot of support for environmental activists, and there will be a very good discussion about the energy transition. Could we also have Mr. Gilbert Kamuntu, the Chief Commercial Officer of the Uganda National Oil Company? The Uganda National Oil Company is in charge of Uganda's commercial interests, and Gilbert is in charge of the Uganda National Oil Company's commercial interests in Uganda. That means that we are dealing with the Chief Commercial Officer of Ugandan Oil. His job is to make sure that the oil makes money. So Gilbert is the one who is going to buy us drinks after the panel. He's also going to explain to us how he makes money in a transition. We have Dr. George Fasher, who is the Director of Marketing and Public Relations of the Tanzania Ports Authority. George, you're most welcome. This is the man who is going to be receiving ECOP. I see some of our friends from ECOP. This guy's job is to make sure we get ECOP here. We have Joe Sang, the Managing Director of the Kenya Pipeline Company. Joe, yes. Joe is the Managing Director of the Kenya Pipeline Company, KPC. You're most welcome, Joe. And I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation about Sorry, this is Engineer David Muriuki. I'm the General Manager Infrastructure Development of KPC, which is the Kenya Petroleum Pipeline Company. And as you know, we are building pipelines, product pipelines, all the way. So I'll begin with George Fasher. George, I'm told there's a presentation you have for us. What we want to know from you, before we start talking about energy transition, we want to know if the Tanzania Ports Authority is ready to receive Ugandan oil come 2025. Are we going to start seeing our oil go? Are the Tanzanian ports ready for our oil? We also have people from DR Congo. Are you ready for Congolese oil? We also have people from South Sudan. Basically, is the Tanzanian Ports Authority ready, or are we actually not ready?
Okay, thank you very much. The moderator, my name is Dr. George Fasher. I'm the Director of Marketing and PR from Tanzania Ports Authority. Before I come to what you have raised as a question, one thing that I need to say is we need to understand that port is a gateway. It's a gateway that, if properly used, will be able to unlock economic potentials. Now, with that recognition that TPA is having, it's so that without infrastructural development, its initiative of unlocking other economic potentials will be very difficult. And therefore, with that, we came to have a huge development project that is being funded by the World Bank called the DMGP, the Dar es Salaam Maritime Gateway Project. This is a massive project, and it has done huge transformation at the Tanzania Ports Authority. For example, it helped us a lot in terms of the capacity building. We know that in order for the port operations to do its responsibilities effectively and efficiently, human resource needs to be taken into account. And this project helped us to capacitate our people in terms of how they are going to handle different vessels, different cargoes, and different improvements in terms of technology. The second thing that this project did is to develop our infrastructures. Because we know if ports need to operate properly, it needs to be efficient in terms of operations. And with that being the case, DMGP came with the notion that we need to improve our infrastructure. And with that, we massively improved our infrastructure from the berth up to the KOJ. KOJ is called the kerosene oil jets. Here is where we handle oil, everything that is being imported. And we have done tremendous improvement under this facility. we have got huge farm tanks. You know that oil needs to be stored so as it can be delivered to the intended targets. But now we are in the project of improving and expanding the farm tanks that we currently have, because we came to realize that when the oil is being delivered, it takes a lot of time to be delivered to the intended targets. Now we have got huge improvements in terms of the farm tanks that are being developed. So we are sure that we are going to be able to handle or the oil that is being exported to DRC, Uganda, and because we know the strategic position that Tanzania is having towards these land hinterland countries. So we are ready, and we will be willing to serve all these countries that will be using our facilities. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fasha, for that very concise and precise answer. I think Engineer Muriuki, Kenya Pipeline Company. Of course, there's a lot of product pipelines that are passing through there. Tell us the role of these pipelines in line with the current transition that we have towards energy. Because I think there's a deep misunderstanding of, I have my own views, I think there's a deep misunderstanding of pipelines. I think you can tell us what it was like, because we get all our fuel from Kenya and Uganda. It comes off the road. You've said the Kenya Pipeline Company has reduced, I'm sure, the carbon footprint of that journey. And if you could just explain to us how the Kenyan pipeline network, first of all, what it is and how it is helping in this transition to a cleaner, greener world.
Thank you and good morning. Before I start, I want to give apologies of Mr. Josang, the MD of the Kenya Pipeline Company. He's held up in a meeting with the oil marketing companies in Uganda. There was a breakfast meeting that overshot the time, so he sent me over to represent him. I am Engineer Muriuki. I'm the General Manager in charge of infrastructure in the Kenya Pipeline Company. Having said that, Kenya Pipeline Company is a company that has been around for long, and I think you can't mention oil and gas, and mostly oil because that's the fuel that we play in mostly, without Kenya Pipeline Company coming into play. Currently, just to describe our infrastructure, we are running pipelines to the length of 1,300 kilometers. From the port of Mombasa, we have a 20-inch pipeline that runs to Nairobi. Then we have 2 pipelines that run from Nairobi all the way to Eldoret and Kisumu, where offtake to the Uganda and the region run. Then we have storage facilities. We have big storage facilities in Mombasa, Nairobi, and Kisumu, Nakuru, and Eldoret. And also, currently, in terms of improving the fuel supply, in addition to the KOJ that has been mentioned by my brother, there is also the new jetty in Mombasa, the Kipefu Oil Terminal 2, that is improving the import flow rate into the region from the old Kipefu Oil Terminal 1 that had a capacity of around 2,500 cubic meters per hour to about just over 12,000. That's 4 times, because you're able to berth 3 vessels at the same time, 24 hours. So in terms of the environment, we are seeing that we are aware that in the recent past we've had the effects of climate change, and we can all see the effect, including effects that are affecting project execution. The other day we were at Mahadi and we were told that they had to stop for a while because the water levels came up, effects of that. And there are conflicts and other issues that have come from that. So then it means we need to look at our energy mix and go towards the energy mix that is going to give us a lower effect on our environment. Now, because KPC is in transportation, you can transport fuel in various ways. You can transport through the pipelines as we do. You can transport through trucks. Now, pipelines is known to be the most environmentally friendly way of transporting because it's not prone to accidents. And if they happen, it's rare. They can be addressed rather quickly. And once you have laid a pipeline, then you are able to monitor and mitigate any effects you'd have on the environment. So Kenya Pipeline right now is aware of the direction towards the net zero. And we've already started a program towards mapping our carbon emissions. We have a consultant on board who is giving us a baseline so that from there, every activity we do, we are able to map our carbon emissions and to mitigate against that. The fact is that in the region we are developing, and for you to develop, then you need energy. And the fossil fuels, then they play a major role in the energy sector. And fact be told is that we are not going to see fossil fuels going away anytime soon. We need them for development. So for us as Kenya Pipeline, what we do is that we want to try and embrace ESG, so that in all these projects that we are undertaking, and because we are also going to develop, the region is discovering crude oil, so it means that we are also going to continue in developing of oil and gas projects. So all we need is to embrace ESG in our projects and ensure that we are mapping, we are getting the carbon credits, we invest in mitigations. And I think that way pipeline will become a big lead in terms of supplying energy, fossil fuels, but still trying to protect the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And maybe before we continue, I want to recognize the presence of the State Minister of Energy and Mineral Development, the Honorable Peter Lokeris. Honorable, you're most welcome. We are discussing the future of oil and gas in the face of the energy transition. And Honorable, as a person who has been in the ministry for, I think, a considerable number of years, and in government, I think, for much longer, you are very attuned to the issues to do with the energy transition. So we are very happy that you're here listening to us. I think the next person I will ask is you, Victoria. Dr. Victoria Naruli. And the question is simply this. What is your view on the need to move away from fossil fuels? Now, the context is that in Uganda here, there are people who are telling us that we need to transition. And we're asking them, at least I keep asking them, how can, we can't transition from darkness to darkness. We are already dark. So this transition, how are we doing it? So, but what is your view on the need to transition from fossil energy to renewable energy? Give us a regional, local, and international context. I'm sure you are well equipped to do that. We are transitioning the microphones.
All right, thank you very much for that, and I'm very, very happy to be here. I think this is a very timely conference because first and foremost, we have to understand that no country is transitioning. They are basically progressing from one energy use to another. And before I start my discussion, I would like to first note some of the books we wrote on energy transitions and the future of the energy sector. And in chapter 1, we introduced the novel concept of energy progression, whereby we realized the fact that although the concept of energy transition has been misused by different people, by different experts from the global north, from the global south, the reality is we still need oil and gas. But how are we going to utilize this oil and gas in a sustainable manner? Because if we are if we are thinking about decarbonizing the energy sector, we have to shift to renewable energy. And I always, besides being the CEO of NAME, I'm also a lecturer at the University of Bradford in the UK. And one of the things I do lecture in is climate change land policy. And then I also do oil and gas land policy and mining land policy. So I always tell some of my students in climate change land policy, if you want to be an activist and you think that by transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables, you are tackling climate change, remember you need the critical minerals, because if we are talking about solar panels, if we're talking about solar energy, you have to think about solar panels. If we are thinking about wind energy, that's all renewable. You have to think about wind turbines. Electric vehicles, because that's also another way of decarbonizing the transport sector. You need to go with the electric vehicles. All these require minerals. And by the way, I also have a book on mining and the law in Africa. So how exactly are you extracting these minerals? Are you going to use renewable energy to extract the minerals? No, you will need fossil fuels to power the extraction of those minerals. So in a way, there's a confusion globally when it comes to the energy transition, because most people think it has to be a shift from fossil fuels to renewables. No, that's not true. You simply need to progress from one energy use to another, and as you're progressing, you have to utilize clean technologies like carbon capture. Because at the end of the day, if you look at the energy life cycle, you will need this oil and gas to get the minerals that are needed for the renewable energy that, in a sense, we call the energy transition. So there's that confusion always, but in reality, even for different countries, we notice that no country is transitioning. Because if we even look at what happened in 2021, 2022, with the global energy crisis, in most cases for African countries, we say we're experiencing energy poverty. And by the way, my first book was on energy poverty. This was in 2018. But since then, I don't believe in energy poverty. I know NG also has a book on energy poverty. I feel it's all about managing the energy resources. We need to change the perspective of how we view the African continent. We have the resources. We have the oil and gas, we have the renewables. We are not energy poor. We simply need to manage these resources to ensure that everyone has affordable energy. But I was going back to the issue of the global energy crisis. We realized that even for the countries in the global north that believed that they were transitioning, they went into confusion. We saw in the UK, they opened the licensing grounds in the North Sea. We saw in Germany, we have many climate change activists in Germany, but they went back to coal. We saw the EU, because in 2019, they had passed a policy, the EU Bank had passed a policy to ban funding for fossil fuels, but they were simply on their knees asking countries to invest more in oil and gas. And this was in 2022, even 2023. So if the countries that have been utilizing these resources for a very long time are not transitioning, who are we Africans to think that we are transitioning? We're simply progressing from one energy use to another. I think that will be the brief for me.
So energy progression, not energy transition. And I think the argument that who are we if the high priests of the transition stabbing the idol in the back, then who are we? I will ask the next question to Gilbert. So Gilbert, you as the chief money man of the Uganda National Oil Company, your business seems to be outdated. There's a global agenda that we must go carbon neutral by 2050. We have the Paris Agreements, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, everything. And the agreement which we have all made in the world is that by 2050, you should be out of business. We must be carbon neutral. Can we achieve carbon neutrality by 2050? And is the way to do it not by stopping or by sanctioning, maybe sanctioning is a big word, by stopping new oil projects? Is there a space, because is there a space for a new oil project like the ones you, Gilbert, are designing, the ones you are pushing, the ones you personally is there space for the thing you're doing? Can we achieve carbon neutrality if Uganda brings a new project on board because of Gilbert Kamundu?
Thank you, Alison. And first of all, thank you for allowing me to join this very esteemed panel. UNOC is the national oil company of Uganda, established by law. We handle all the commercial interests of the government of Uganda in the oil and gas industry. We have commercial interests across the entire petroleum value chain. In the upstream, where we are the joint venture partners of Total, CNOOC, and we also have our own exploration licenses, and also in the midstream and the downstream. And so, going straight to your question about carbon neutrality and sanctions, as you call them, on oil and gas. It's important to have the context before we have this discussion, because when we talk about the global economy has been growing sustainably for a very long decades. At the same time of the growth of the global economy is the growth of the global population. Now, these two things result in a significant amount of energy consumption, and it's important to have that framework. Oil and gas, to date, as of this year, supplies about 80% of the global energy needs. And depending on which forecast you use, that might go down to 50, 60%. And there are some skeptics about even that. And therefore, the idea of carbon neutrality at the expense of oil and gas needs to be thought through very carefully. And I can mention a recent incident, which is a good exercise in understanding why oil and gas remains part of the energy mix. We all know in this room the Russia-Ukraine conflict that started in February 2021. And the outcome of that conflict was a sanction on Russian oil and gas supplies to the global market. And that took about 10 million barrels of crude oil per day out of the market. And so it's important for us to understand what was the outcome of a sudden removal of 10 million barrels of crude oil from the market. And in summary, the outcome was a reversal of energy transition. I think, as my dear colleague here, Dr. Nalole, has mentioned, in Europe alone, the energy consumption is extremely high, and the political and social unrest that came from the sudden stop of supply was such that many countries reversed their energy policy. In the North Sea, exploration licenses were issued because of the need for more oil. As we all know, coal-fired power plants were reopened. The US president was putting US refineries under pressure to expand their production. And so that is a good way of explaining what happens if this transition is progressed without oil and gas as part of the energy mix. The outcome is going in the opposite direction. So sanctions may likely result in higher greenhouse gas emissions and not lower greenhouse gas emissions. Why? Because the global economy needs energy to sustain this growth. And so I don't believe sanctions are the solution. In my view, the solution comes from technology and from some other financial or fiscal incentives. And I'll just mention a few. From a technology perspective, the key issue with hydrocarbons is not necessarily the combustion, but the emissions. And so therefore, carbon capture and sequestration technologies are extremely important for this discussion. The ability to capture the emissions and store them in underground caverns deals with the emissions problem, but not at the expense of oil and gas production. I think that's number one. Number two is, and I think it was Dr. Lule who mentioned it, decarbonizing our projects. And this is very important. It is a fact, and we should not shy away from it, that oil and gas results in high greenhouse gas emissions, or at least greenhouse gas emissions. And therefore, decarbonizing the projects is an extremely important part of this agenda of fulfilling global energy, not at the expense of oil and gas. Take, for example, in Uganda. The Uganda project, Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions is about 13 kilograms of CO2 emissions per barrel. This is extremely low. And by comparison, I believe the North Sea is at about 12 or 13 as well. And the Africa average is 33 kilograms of CO2 equivalent emissions per barrel. Of course, between Uganda and the North Sea is producing about 1.2 million barrels of crude oil per day. We are planning peak production of 230,000. So in terms of total emissions, the North Sea is 5 or 6 times higher in terms of emissions. But the key question here is how in Uganda has the project achieved such a low emissions target? And that is through at least 2 things. I think one is connecting the project to the electricity grid, and therefore using electricity as opposed to heavy-duty diesel gensets. Extremely important. And the second is through use of some other decarbonizing efforts like solar panels. The ECOP project will have solar panels, about 5 along the route, to provide energy as opposed to combustion or consumption of crude oil. And so this is another way in which decarbonizing projects helps to ensure we achieve our carbon neutrality, not at the expense of oil and gas. I'll just mention 2 more. The third one I want to mention is, of course, there's many carbon offsetting initiatives that we can do. UNOC, for example, is in an initiative along with our sister institution, the Uganda Petroleum Institute of Kigumba, with an intention to plant 40 million trees within 5 to 7 years. And this will provide a good carbon offset for any emissions that happen for our projects. Last but not least is a financial or fiscal solution. I think in this room we may have heard about carbon trading. Carbon trading is a good way for countries like the developing countries of Uganda or East Africa to be able to benefit from the fact that we are not the major emitters, and being able to offset emissions somewhere with some of the carbon sinks that we have in Africa, such as in the DRC, the carbon sink of the rainforest there. And so with these kinds of initiatives, we find that we are not in a conflict. It's not either or. It is not either renewable resources or oil and gas. We can have both and, because the world needs all the energy sources to sustain our economies. Thank you.
I think at Gilbert if you were on trial, you would have acquitted yourself very well. The argument is that once we saw what happened when we had less oil, we had higher emissions as a result. And also, the poorest people definitely paid the highest. The cost of fuel at the pump for the traveling public across the world was atrocious. That takes me to you, NJ. NJ, you said yesterday that the world needs to decarbonize and Africa needs to industrialize, if I got you correctly. And you then told us that somebody said that, I forget the name, I think one of his names had Bill. I remember the name Bill, but I remember it because I had a bill to pay. So so Mr. Bill, whose other name I can't remember, had said that we shall that we can't meet the bill for carbon neutrality if they build the East African crude oil pipeline. He said the entire energy transition will collapse, if I understood Mr. Bill, if there is energy transition. And in response, you said that we need to industrialize. We need to industrialize the world. The world needs to decarbonize. So I want to ask you, really, a question, but 2 questions in it. The first one is: do we have a responsibility as Africa to actually reduce our carbon footprint. I know you told us it's East Africa, all of us, all 300 million of us are emitting 0.2%. So now, should we reduce it to 0.175%? Do we have a need to reduce as Africans? But secondly, and more fundamentally, if you could give us, because from a global perspective, if you could give us very briefly the scheme, or your understanding of the debate, the energy transition debate in relation to Africa and relation to projects in Tanzania, Uganda, Mozambique, Kenya, DR Congo. Yeah, I know it's a very brief. I hope the question shall not. I hope the answer shall not be as long as the question, but we shall.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. You got a port guy, pipeline guy, an oil man, and a lady and a gentleman. So this is very good for me to join this. Can you hear me? The fact of the matter is, we need to go back to the basics. Do we need an energy transition? I think we don't need an energy transition in East Africa. We need an energy addition. And those energy additions come from looking at the numbers. And those numbers come with how many people lack energy access. Energy poverty is real in East Africa. And we should be very careful how we color these words and focus on how they define it and let us follow that definition. The first thing, and we have to get back to the fundamentals, it is access. So East Africa needs energy addition. And those energy additions comes with you using your natural resources to really empower your people. Those are the first stewards of the environment. And Edison, to answer your question, nobody loves the environment more than we do. I think the biggest mistake we do is that we take this backseat and we start thinking that we are criminals of the environment. So if somebody creates a group in the UK to oppose, like you mentioned, the East Africa crude oil pipeline, oppose energy development in Tanzania or South Sudan or Kenya, they call your group Friends of the Earth. No, they're not Friends of the Earth. Look at your carbon emissions and look at mine. So if you're Friends of the Earth, charity begins at home. Decarbonize at home. Don't come back here and give people lectures about poor people trying to create access and additions for themselves. There is something fundamentally wrong that those that have the most are trying to deprive those that have the least. We have to really look at development issues around the transition. Financing. Less than 2% global financing has come into this continent when it comes to renewables. You're talking about transition, just transition. But then look at the East African region. You know, they go around Kenya, they do one nice grant out there. I didn't think that we had our political leaders speaking yesterday, and even the business leaders. I didn't think this transition was meant to be discussed as taking Africa and East Africa back to aid. The fundamental idea that we are going to rely on somebody to give you handouts and aid as your engine for development is false. It doesn't happen. No country has ever, our region has ever been developed by aid or been developed by renewables. Pick one country that those solar panels have happened. Dr. Naludin talked about Germany and the European countries when they had the crisis. They could print all the money in the world. They can print all the dollars. They didn't print as much euros to turn to putting solar panels on every European home. They went right back to Africa. And they said, give me your gas. They went right back to Africa. I mean, they went to South Africa and said, give me your coal. And South Africa is in the dark right now, 8 to 10 hours a day. They know the power of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are real. We need that. I think we've come to a point where we start to distinguish that. But also, it's evident that we're not in an era of transition. Because, I mean, look at the DRC that you mentioned yesterday that is joining this East African community. The DRC is a carbon sink. It's a carbon sink. You're emitting nothing. So what are you transitioning from, I mean, nobody wants to breathe clean air in the dark. You don't. I'm sorry. Nobody wants to. So I think it's something where we have to really look at the global community. We are on our own in this transition. This is not going to be done by us waiting for Europe or America to do this for us. Your ministers are here, they've been to COP. One of the biggest questions they will always ask at COP is, where is the $100 billion you promised 10, 15 years ago? You have not delivered on that promise, and you've gone every year, you've not delivered on promise. So how are you going to abandon your resources for people who give you unkept promises? So Ellen, to make this very short, I know we like to watch movies and we get into these fancy things. We would have to really gather local financing to drive up that energy access that you need, and it starts with your oil and gas. Don't apologize for it. We would have to really look at international financing and create that attractive environment that brings in a transition as you want. And it cannot be a transition as they want. But then Superman is not coming. We have to do it ourselves. Batman is not coming. What's that other one? Wakanda Forever is a good movie, but the Black Panther is not coming. That transition starts with what we do right now and how we drive that up. But don't ever back down on giving up on your resources, because the East Africa crude oil pipeline is the most important test case for African energy development. If you give up on this pipeline because somebody is sitting in the Scandinavia and crying, I've got a lot of beautiful girls I see around Uganda. They are also important. Their lives also matter. We can't be that we have to chalk up, block African progress because of one young girl in the Scandinavian who everybody thinks now she's a hero. I don't think she's a hero. She's not a hero. I think Uganda matters. If you stop these energy developments right here in this country, that would be a test case on how you move to stop energy development across the African continent. So if you're here thinking that it's just a Uganda problem and a Tanzania problem, no. They're coming for you next, because this is now the new battleground for stopping energy development. I don't know what you did in Uganda so much that to draw this much attention, but you need to get right at it and push for this energy.
Thank you very much, NJ. Before I make any comments on that, I want to introduce also the Minister, the Honorable Minister of Energy and Mineral Development, Honorable Ruth Nankabirwa. And NJ, I want to assure you that we are not going to stop as long as our leaders are here. They are ready to take on that fight. They have fought bigger battles. The Honorable Ruth Nankabirwa was the Minister of Defense in the middle of war in Uganda. And after they appointed her, war ended. So I think there's sufficient thing. But I think the point is a strong and fair point to make. We cannot continue to have a conversation which is not, we cannot continue to debate breathing clean air in the dark without food, because once we start, we're not breathing clean air in the dark, we're using charcoal and firewood. So we're choking on dirty air in the dark. Yes, it is. We are suffering from multiple jeopardy, double jeopardy. So now, maybe, I don't know how much time we have left on the panel, because I want to go through like 17 more questions. But I'm told we have 35 more minutes, so that's quite good. So maybe we'll do closing remarks, and I'll start, of course, with you. Maybe I'll change the order. I'll go with you, David Muriuki, from the Kenya Pipeline Company. I think from the conversation we've had and from what you said about, we didn't know, for example, that Kenya has 1,300 kilometers worth of pipelines already. Is there, first of all, just to tell us if you're looking at building more, we need product pipelines coming this side, I'm sure. And then the effect, how you clean up, because people here think that once the oil spill happens, the world will come to an end. So if you could just give us that Kenyan experience of spilling oil 1,003 kilometers all over the place. So basically the experience of the Kenya Pipeline Company, today's experience in making sure that you clean up the environment. But also if you could give us closing remarks as well.
All right, thank you. Yes, like I mentioned, we have 1,300 kilometers, and we are still continuing. The fact is that because our region is growing, our economies are growing, and the driver for this growth is energy. And currently, fossil fuels are contributing to the biggest percentage of our energy need. And even from the International Energy Agency, we are seeing that even by 2050, when we are trying to be carbon zero, we'll only have reduced dependency on fossil fuel by 2%. So we still have fossil fuel. So in terms of development of infrastructure, then we are saying that we are not stopping. So in terms of our experience in environment, over the years we've had several, like leaks along our pipeline. First is to say that we have invested in detection. We have systems that will detect when there is intrusion, when there is a leak, so that we are able to respond as quickly as possible. But having said that, our pipelines are about 1 meter below ground. So any leaks, then first of all, they are contained within the area of leak. But then we have a very elaborate system for mitigation. And what happens is that when there is a leak, first of all, because our pipelines are within our own wayleaf, we'll go and immediately stop that leak, probably by closing the valves nearby, and then we clamp. We have specialized people who are able to do that. And then after that, we do bioremediation. We have a elaborate process for doing bioremediation. We have the authorities that look into what we have done and confirm that the soils around have been cleaned to the expected environmental levels. So that one we are able to do and assure. And then to my closing remark, in terms of energy transition, having said that we are going to have the fossil fuels around for a long time, and transitioning into clean energy, to me, the real transition that is required immediately is an attitude transition. In terms of how do we look at our environment, we need to engrave in our projects, decarbonizing our projects. I think the transition we need to do is how do we do this? How do we develop more sinks for carbon? How do this information about the effects of carbon emission to our environment, how does it reach every person in the village? So that it does not become just a conversation for such a forum, but it is owned by every citizen. We need that kind of advocacy. That is the transition that we need now, not transition for moving from fossil fuels at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. We need an attitude transition. I think it's interesting what you've just told us. We don't have to have a huge debate about ECOP. Right here in the region, we are seeing valves being used. We are seeing cleanups happening. We are seeing 1,300 kilometers of pipeline in Kenya that is dealing with these issues using technology and experience. So I think those who come to lecture us about the end of the world should relax. They should also have an attitude transition. I think I will go to Dr. Victoria Nalule. If you can transition to the microphone. Dr. Victoria Nalule, I think, Honorable Minister, I don't know if you've met Dr. Victoria Nalule. She's a Ugandan, a lecturer in the UK. She has an author of at least 3 books on energy. And she's an extremely experienced professional in this regard. where do you see, you told us it's not energy transition, it's energy progression. In your closing remarks, you can tell us about this progression and where we should be.
All right, thank you very much. First, we need to recognize the fact that climate change is real. There are countries that have been impacted by this climate change. And as we are progressing from one energy use to another, we have to understand the importance of energy. Angie was talking about economic development, but also the issues of security. That's why the Global North will often focus on the aspect of energy security, because we have seen many people protesting in Europe because of an increase in energy bills. Energy is not just about economic development, but it's also essential for every country's security. So we have in the aspect of security. And understanding the fact that we are not ready to transition, we are not ready to leave behind oil and gas, because the funny thing is this oil and gas is essential for the energy transition, like I was mentioning. So we need to progress from one energy use to another. And as we are progressing from one energy use to another, we have to ensure that at the national level, at the regional level, and also at the international level, there is enough support. Because we cannot also ignore the risks associated with the energy transition. The energy sector, it's global. These are global projects. One country cannot develop their energy resources. You need the partnership from different foreign countries. You need financial institutions. So we need the support at the national level, regional level, and international level. So as we are progressing, let the countries that feel like, if you feel you still need oil and gas, you should have all the support, the financial support. And also, let's not forget about the legal risks associated with the energy transition, or even the legal risks associated with extracting fossil fuels that are impacting various oil companies, international oil companies. So at the national level, how are you going to mitigate these kind of risks? And then we cannot forget about the social risks associated with the energy transition, but also associated with extracting the fossil fuel resources. Yes, we are supporting oil and gas, but let's not forget about the people in the Niger Delta in Nigeria who have protested because they haven't seen any value, from the oil resources. So we need to think about the social risks, the financial risks, and the legal risks, and at the national level, find ways of mitigating these kind of risks. Because yes, we need oil and gas, but the energy transition is real. There are people who are benefiting from it, because the energy sector is also very political. So there are always people at the international level who are pushing for it because they're benefiting. Companies that are selling solar panels. I was in Tanzania some time back doing my PhD research, and this company, a company from Germany, was selling solar panels and were actually exploiting the poor people in some parts of Tanzania. So how exactly are you going to manage this energy transition? We need oil and gas, but we also need to think about the various risks and find ways of mitigating these risks. And we can't also forget about the energy disputes that are really increasing. And in most cases, it's the African countries or host governments that lose in these energy arbitration disputes. So you also need to ask yourself legally, what kind of clauses are you putting in those oil agreements? So we really need to think ahead and be able to mitigate all the risks associated with the energy transition. But closing remarks, let's progress. We need to change the perspective on the African continent. You can no longer be defined or get someone to define how you should utilize your energy resources or to tell you the kind of perspective you should take. We need to take lead in this kind of discussions and define what we want when it comes to the development of the energy sector on the African continent. Thank you very much.
The transition, Gilbert. Oh yeah, let's do Gilbert. Gilbert, you've just heard everything that has been said and all the risks, and you're actually in charge as the Chief Commercial Officer of making sure that we mitigate against all those risks. So in your closing remarks, could you tell us about, because this energy dilemma or trilemma it's real, as Dr. Navle has said. So could you tell us how these issues can be balanced as governments, and then give us your closing remarks?
Okay, thank you very much, Ellison. And I think it's important, as usual, to have the context before we make decisions. And when we describe the East African countries and the situations they are facing, at the risk of repeating myself, the economies are growing at approximately 5 to 6% per annum. The population of our East African countries are growing at approximately 3% per annum. Uganda is about 3.2, DRC is about 3, Kenya is about 1.9%. They're all growing. These are young populations that have aspirations and have significant energy needs, which are right now being met by 90% biomass. That is not a sustainable situation. And therefore, governments and decision makers in government do not have the luxury of choosing their energy sources. All energy sources must be on the table. And that is why we consider UNOC to be a fundamental part of this equation. UNOC, along with our joint venture partners in the upstream and the oil marketing companies in the downstream, because we believe that oil and gas has to be on the table as part of the tools that our government decision makers use to supply the energy needs of their populations. And so therefore, we don't consider this discussion to be either renewables or oil and gas. It has to be both renewables and oil and gas. And in Uganda's case, that is exactly what the government is doing, because, for example, when we took FID on the upstream oil and gas in Tilenga Kingfisher, at the same time, the government of Uganda signed an MOU with Total Energies for the development of at least 1 gigawatt of renewable energy, commercial renewable energy by 2030. So it's clear that in Uganda's case, as is the case for all East African countries, it is all energy sources on the table. So from our perspective as UNOC, we consider it extremely important to execute on the projects in our portfolio. We need to get to first oil in the upstream in the shortest possible time and start producing. The crude oil price today was $76 per barrel. There is a reason why it is that high, because there is demand. And if there is demand, we need to meet that demand both regionally and globally. We need to execute our refinery. Our refinery is extremely important to provide energy security for the region, not just for Uganda. And so therefore, from our perspective as UNOC, we consider we are going to focus on execution, because we consider oil and gas to be one of the tools that the government of Uganda can use to fulfill the energy needs of the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilbert. I think Dr. Fasha is the next one. I think, Gilbert, I think what we've gotten from you is very clear. Government doesn't have the luxury of choosing its energy resource if it's going to meet the challenges that have been addressed. And the fundamental challenge is providing security of supply for the people who are being born right now. Dr. Fasha, Tanzania, as the Tanzania Ports Authority, as the regulator for the port, where do you see Tanzania in this conversation of the transition? Of course, as the Ports Authority, you are the receiver and giver of carbon dioxide, because for you, you receive ships that are using heavy fuel oils and you send out. But where do you see, how can the Ports Authority help with the transition, and where do you see this whole transition discussion and your concluding remarks as well? I see that I'm being looked at very nicely for the time we have kept.
Okay, thank you very much. As the discussions were going on, I had one question moving around my head. When we are speaking of decarbonization, we know at TPA we have got some seaports and lake ports. One of the biggest seaport is called Mtwara. And of recent, Mtwara has been exporting large amounts of coal to Europe. Now I was like, if they're saying this is what we're supposed to do, but they still need coal, then I guess to me, I can feel that we need to have solutions which are country specific. We can't have an umbrella of a solution, one solution to all. And when it comes to TPA, TPA understands the relationship that port operations have with the environment, because we know with these two relationships, we understand that the result will be the energy efficiency and climate resilience. So in taking this into account, we have got a lot of initiatives at place to ensure that we manage all these port operations sustainably. We plan objectively by taking into account of all the environmental impact assessment initiatives. We execute our port operations by taking into account how much we take care of the environment. We do some evaluation of all the port operations. We do some evaluations to see where we go wrong and find some corrective measures. And then the management responds if there are any problems to that. But to us, we see that there is a huge market towards that, and we are ready to handle all the imports of the oil from different countries. What I would urge that now we need to have the mindset change. Despite the fact that we handle oil, but we need to have the mindset change in taking into account that the environment needs to be taken care so that we can have these sustainable business operations. Thank you.
Okay, I think the last question will go to you, NJ. And first of all, I think Doctor has been very clear. First of all, he has told us that in Tanzania, he's seeing that they're exporting coal to some places. But also, I think the mindset change and the attitude transition seems to be coming very strongly from the panel. NJ, the closing remarks, but also where do you see us going? What do you see as the future in this entire discussion? Do you think we are going to win, or do you think we are going to lose?
I'm winning. We're not losing. I think we have no choice. We have to win as East Africa, as an Africa, and the world at large. It's called global warming, not East Africa warming. So you need a global solution. So you can't put the burden on this region alone. But I'll leave you with these stats. If you take the gas out of Tanzania and across Africa, if you produce all of that gas, produce your fossil fuels, your greenhouse gas emissions would increase by 0.67%. That's nothing. That's nothing. Those stats are from the IEA and the UN itself. Your greenhouse gas emissions would increase by 0.67%. So the question is, where is the fuss with poor people getting energy development to really grow up energy? Energy is life. You know, I love my sister and friend, doctor, but I would disagree with you. I don't think there are countries who should say, if they choose to produce their oil and gas. No, we need to produce our oil and gas because you need base load energy. Base load energy. And that base load energy is what you need right now. And don't get into this fancy stuff about, oh, electronic vehicles, they're peddling. Who wants to drive a Tesla when they have no electricity? How are you going to charge it? I mean, sometimes we fly into Europe and America, we come back, we see these things, we don't really, they say think global, act local. You give someone a Tesla around anywhere when they have no electricity, you'll drive for 2 hours and that would stop. So we should stop getting these narratives that has nothing to do with what everyday people do. Yes, what happens with everyday Uganda, everyday Tanzania, everyday Kenyan. It's a young girl that gets up in the morning and has no lights in the house, has to look at grandma and fetch wood to burn biomass so that and get food ready to go to school. And she goes to class and gets into that classroom, probably has no meal, and then she has to sit in there with no lights and no computers in order to study. And then she still comes back home. And what happens when she comes back home? She sits in that house. In the evening, she don't study to put on the late night clock because there is no light in that house. And when there's no light in that house, she goes to bed in the dark. That's an African reality. And if we don't commit ourselves towards dealing with that reality, and that reality is not going to be fit by solar energy or wind. It can help to some parts with some mini grids, but you need base load. That's why Germany goes for base load. That's why the UK opens oil licenses. That's why the US last month said, I'll put in $8 billion to drill all over Alaska. You need to get where we are here. And doctor, you talk about energy security. It's not just energy security for some people. What about the people in this room? They also deserve energy security. They're also human beings. Their lives matter. And we should leave this place today, tomorrow, with one clarion call. This job for energy addition, I don't like to use the word transition because we need energy addition. It's not the job of your minister. It's not the job of your big people like Gilbert. It is the job of those in the back to start advocating and start bringing up this, because when you say, well, let's just let the ministers talk about it, it doesn't help. We all need to be soldiers for energy and really drive up African energy, because if we don't do that, our generation is really living itself. Do you realize, and I'll close with this, I was looking at history around the region, Julius Nyerere and all the great leaders that freed up this region. They didn't have no cell phones, they didn't have no email, no Twitter, no Facebook, Snapchat, and everything. Here you have this young generation with every tool on your space. You spend time with it, really tweeting and TikToking stupid stuff, but you can't really get your act together to push for energy. Let's get out there and really drive energy. This is your chance. Nobody's going to do it for you. And if you think that somebody's going to give you some handouts to make this happen, you're already seeing it with what they're doing at ACOP. That's just the beginning, folks. Let's go push for energy. And that's why I'm not ashamed of it when I say, drill, baby, drill. You go out there and drill more wells and we'll do well.
Drill, baby, drill. I don't think I can even summarize. I think the summary is that there are people who are environmental conservationists, and then there are those who are poverty conservationists, and we must allow people to conserve poverty here. Do I have time for a question from the audience? I have time for a question from the audience? One question from the audience. I've been given time for one question from the audience, and there are two hands that are up. So how do we choose? Someone has already got the microphone. The Bible says that the kingdom of God shall suffer violence, and the violent shall take it by force.
We'll take one gentleman and one lady, but let's keep it brief.
Yes.
All right.
One gentleman and one lady.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ellison. And thank you for giving me the chance to ask a question. You obviously have a well...
Introduce yourself.
My name is Andrew Chan. I work for the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. Now, you obviously have a well-assembled panel, well-decorated, including you, the moderator. Now, aren't we burying our heads in the sand here? The activism is real against, ECOP. You've heard of Stop ECOP and all that. Now, I really haven't heard anyone talk about, well, Victoria mentioned the risks. Good. But the risk of financing is real. And financiers are pulling out of supporting some of these projects. How do we really address that challenge? I want to hear that. Thank you.
The risk of financing, I think I'll ask, who will take that question? Gilbert. Yeah?
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Dr. Kevin Anyu. I am a member of the board of the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. And first I want to appreciate the panelists. I think that was a very wonderful discussion. And just before I ask my question, I would like to add to that voice saying that we really need to understand that as human beings, we are very selfish people. And we need to start to look at what is in it for who. If I am advocating for you going for whatever solution, you should be trying to find out what is this person trying to gain from. If I go for this, nobody will give you a solution where they will not actually benefit. So, like what has been mentioned there, if I'm going to produce solar panels and everybody's going solar, I am the one gaining the most, as a matter of fact. If I am going to send you for electric cars and I'm the one producing all the batteries, come and mine your minerals, maybe at a very low cost, and come and sell back expensively, and you deal with the electricity, I am the one gaining the most. So I think we really need to look into it, and I am glad that in this conference, we are coming from several regions and beginning to see, maybe not beginning to see, but putting out our voice there and saying it is time for a change, it is time to look at reality. I like the idea of country-specific or region-specific solutions, but also we need to go back to who is defining what for us. You know, time and again we hear this definition, they talk about poverty, these poor countries, they name us everything. Global north, global south, then you don't know where does the south and north stop. It is drawn in some way you don't understand. But we need to be able to actually understand when somebody says development and then 2 years later comes back and says, now I'm redefining development. You can't do that because it appears like what you are now doing is working, and you need to step back. So we need to be sure of what we are doing. And maybe to answer partly what the gentleman asked, I think we really need to come to a point where we take meaningful partnerships. Because many partnerships, again, such as maybe financing, come with strings, sometimes even strings that do not come out at that point. So this is where I like the idea that we need capacity, the capacity that understands what the sector is about and are able to unravel what is coming from under the table. Okay? So my question is, before that, we need some kind of reality check on ourselves as we make those partnerships. But my question is, what from here? This was a very beautiful discussion. But are we going at the end of this maybe conference to come up with some kind of, steering committee also to see what can actually be done in this, if it is this hot and we are saying we can't leave anything behind, how can we move at such a pace that we do not simply succumb to, because most of the time we are being pulled, we need the technology has to be produced elsewhere and we buy it. So how can we actually, as a region, as a continent, forge forward without being just pulled along? I hope that at the end of this conference we can have some kind of ideas. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll take that one. The question being, what next from this conversation? She also thanked the moderator very much for very good moderation, but the question was, I don't know who will take that one. Okay, Angel will take that one. So it's going to be Angel and Gilbert. Okay, but I also want Angel to also comment as well on the issue of finance, because I've realized that Gilbert is in the middle of financial negotiations and he may have to be more polite than we want. So maybe Angel, who is not negotiating for a pipeline, may. And could you also hear from the Honorable Minister as well? Are we allowed? Yes, we are allowed, of course. We shall hear from the Honorable Minister as well on this issue. Why we want to hear from the Minister is because the Minister has been at the forefront. You can see the man is already, but the Minister has been at the forefront of this issue. We saw her at IDPEC. We saw her in COP. We've seen her standing shoulder to shoulder with some of the biggest names in the world on this issue. And I can say without fear of contradiction that every time she has spoken, we have felt proud and honored as Ugandans to have her there. And she has explained our case extremely well, so it would not be fair for this panel to end without the Minister giving us the closing remarks, because amongst all of us, she's our expert here. So
I think we should allow her then, because you made her sound more senior than all, especially with the financial issues. So
let's 1 minute. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I understand we have to be brief, so I'll aim to be brief, moderator. And I think just to summarize the question, activism is real and it is resulting in an impact on financing. And I think indeed there are two ways to address this specific issue. The first one is what you've taken the words out of my mouth, is that we need to control the narrative ourselves. And in fact, I was about to give credit to our Honorable Minister because that is exactly what she has done. Along with the support of some of the panelists here, NJ has to get credit, yourself, Ellison, Dr. Nalule. We have to control our narrative, otherwise someone will speak for us. And then on the actual issue of financing, we should not shy away from the fact that our projects have an impact and we must manage that impact. And the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline has complied with all the IFC international standards. It has complied with, of course, the national law. And the land acquisition and compensation process is considered one of the highest. And these are the things that we need to do as we go and secure financing. Money is there because what we're talking about, $5 billion US dollars in the capital markets, is a drop in the ocean. For every one lender or financer who pulls out, there are several others who are ready and able to take over because we have a fundamentally sound, commercially robust, environmentally friendly project. So the project is friendly, it is sound, it is solid. And so I just want to give assurance that we shall close the financing for the pipeline. We shall get to first oil. Thank you.
Listen, where do we go from here? I think to that young man who's asking about it from the Petroleum Authority, worried about financing, there is going to be finance. There is money. If the project is bankable, you are going to get financing for it. I think what is you really have to, and I think what really works here in Uganda is that you're having a very strong government and state backing of this project at this time, and that is encouraging, that's helpful. Tanzania is doing 30 billion LNG project. You don't tell them to stop because you say, don't do your LNG, there is finance. Heck, they finance people in Ukraine. So don't tell me you can't finance people in Uganda. And where do we go from here? We have to resolve on one issue. We need to drive key points, whether it is 3, 4, 5, coming out of this conference. And the minister and the ED talked yesterday about the African Energy Bank. I still think we really need to drive that and not depend on others for your energy development. $2 trillion of private wealth in this continent. There's no reason why we can't cut red tape and regulations to really free the markets and ensure that we can rally financing to really drive up energy projects. That is really how you're going to untangle that. That African Energy Bank, that Afri-Exim and Apple, they're working on. I think we need to be encouraging that. But big on that as well, we really need to look at this from a different perspective. This is your last chance to get energy right. And if we move towards that, we stand to be that generation that can really do it. I think a lot of good things will come out of these. The discussions have been so good, but I also believe that we need to put action to it because that arc of that moral universe, it doesn't bend by itself. It's everyday people that shape it. And I think I'm more confident coming here and living here than when I came in that some stuff would happen. Nobody ever thought ECOP would be where it is today, but we also know the job is not done. It will be done. Nobody believed that Tanzania would not get this project going. TPDC has moved. They are getting it. They're very quiet. They don't talk about it, but they're getting 30 billion, and you worried about 5 billion right here. So don't talk about risk. It's going to happen. It's your time. Let's go make it happen.
Hello. Yeah, good morning, everyone. I know I have time to give closing remarks, but I thought that I could say something. One is to congratulate you, the panelists, and thank you so much. And two is to allay the fears of those people who think that we are burying our heads in the sand, that financing challenges are for real, and so we are scared. You've watched movies where a big animal like a lion is chasing a small animal. If you are faced with such a situation and you know that you can't fight the lion, if it barks at you, you bark. You stop, don't run away. You run away, you are inviting it to chase you and eat you. You stand, it barks, you bark. You don't move. So do what the activists are doing. Those who are against the development of the oil and gas, what are they doing? They are speaking, they are writing, they are talking. So you talk. You talk. Tell these financiers that we know them. The double standards. The ship in Tanzania, Mtwara, is carrying coal. Where is coal going? Have the financiers stopped financing such activities? No. So you have to back. You are not burying your heads under the sand. No. And very soon you will see them change. Because there are other countries which are widening their hands to welcome us. They are offering money. And they are invading Africa big time. And we shall take their money. And we shall develop Africa. So let us back at them. We are small, but we have the voice. I want to thank you, Dr. Yun, for calling upon the young people who are on Twitter, they are on Snapchat. What are they communicating? Please continue. I congratulate you. I will back at them. And I will tell them the double standards. Those who have gone back to using of coal because of the crisis that has been brought by the war in Russia-Ukraine war, is an eye-opener. So the crisis is real, but Africa has been in this crisis for ages. We've been cutting down trees for ages. Some are just experiencing this kind of crisis. Continue backing. They will have to give us the money. They will have to give us the money. Because we make a contribution as Africa. And please continue being united. In my speeches in Europe, I rarely talk about Uganda. I talk about Uganda in the opening remarks, inviting people to come and visit the Pearl of Africa. The rest is Africa. Africa, Africa, Africa. Once we speak as Africa because we are beautiful. We have the resources. We have the minerals they want for the electric cars. We have everything. We have the food. They will never manufacture food. Food is supposed to be grown. We have the soils. So, I mean, please, we are not burying our heads in the sand. We are doing work. And let's continue to do the work. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause. But first turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, back. Turn to the other neighbor, say, neighbor, back. Maybe you can back at them to practice this backing thing. But let's give it up for our panel. I think they're just going to pause for a picture right there. Thank you so much, Ellison. I add my voice to say you have done a brilliant job, even if you have eaten into some of my time. But I think this has been very, 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 very well done. I think the Chief Backer will join us on the stage to inspire us to back some more. Yeah. Don't run away. If you run away, it will follow its instinct to chase and you will be eaten. We'll just request the panel that was here earlier to also come and take a picture with the minister so that you are inspired to back. We'll allow the minister to join so that the force of the back is greater. As they come up, another memorable statement up there was, "Drill, baby, drill." All right, thank you all very much. Let's give it up for both of the panelists, both teams that have been up here. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we are about 55 minutes ahead of program, but I think those minutes have been very, very well spent. We'll be now going for our tea break. But I'd like to give you specific instructions for what's going to happen after tea and after lunch, okay? If you have this book, you can look at page 72 for the details. But just so you know, the tea break that we're going for is sponsored by the Tanzanian Petroleum Development Corporation. So thank you so much. Drink that tea and coffee and snack with one heart, knowing that every bill has been covered. So when we return, we'll not return to the room here. After the tea break, which is just 30 minutes, you have an option of 8 panel sessions to choose from. Each of these 8 panel sessions will be 1 hour exactly. And so you'll have the chance to go to 2. So you'll go for 1 for the first hour, then you'll switch to the second for yet another hour, after which you'll be released for lunch. And so I just want very quickly, in case you don't have the booklet, to let you know which the sessions are, and then I can release you for your break tea. So happening here in the Victoria Ballroom, right here, 30 minutes after this, we'll have the session on managing environmental safety and social impacts in oil and gas operations here in the ballroom. In Katonga Hall, we have policy, legal, fiscal, and regulatory regimes. Then in Addis Hall, all of these halls are within the premises. Governance in extractive sector and impacts of COVID-19 on the petroleum industry. In Choga Hall, we have data management. And the other 4 we have in, when we have switched again after 30 minutes, back here in Victoria Ballroom, we'll have managing environmental health, safety, security, economic and social impacts in oil and gas operations. In Katonga Hall, legal, fiscal, and regulatory regimes. Addis Hall, governance in extractive sector and impacts of COVID-19 on the petroleum industry. And Choga Hall, technological advancement in East Africa. I'll request the moderators to ensure they stick to 1 hour, and then after we switch, another hour, and you will release members for lunch. Thank you very much. After lunch, we shall converge here and I'll give you the directions for where we go after that. Thank you so much. God bless you, Mr. DJ. Over to you, sir.
Uganda or in East Africa or even Africa. If you are in Uganda or in East Africa or even Africa and you have no clue of where the biggest frontier or the newest frontier for oil and gas is, which is Uganda, then you're walking blind. What you need to appreciate is that the incubator is probably the only institution in the country that is supporting the training and support of businesses in the oil and gas sector. That was our initial premise, and we have stuck to that. Normally, it's an easy program that we have been sharing or working with the businesses. Now we are going a step further to have specific programs geared for the oil and gas sector, and this is through our supply development program.
What Stanbic Incubator is doing in conjunction with UNOC is very, very important. First, because oil and gas is a nascent industry in the country, so which means people actually don't know what is required of them, what services are available for them to participate in, and more importantly, what are the required standards and the goods and services to supply. So UNOC went into a memorandum of understanding with Stanbic Incubator to make sure that actually our suppliers benefit from continuous training to enable them win contracts in the oil and gas sector, and not only to win contracts, but also to understand what is required, what are the standards required of the oil and gas sector, how can they win contracts, how can they improve their business processes to win contracts not only in the oil and gas sector but across board, but also out of this country, how they can participate in oil and gas sectors for other countries that are surrounding us. As you know, Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda, DRC, Southern Sudan, they all have oil and gas. And so we thought Stanbic Incubator could be a very good partner to help us actually achieve that objective of developing oil and gas expertise within the country, but on the supplier side. UNOC does it for our internal staff and other Ugandans. National content basically looks at two areas. One of the areas is companies being able to supply goods and services to the oil and gas sector. And the second is having manpower that can be employed by the oil and gas sector. And definitely Stanbic is training people, and we believe that most probably from the FID phase, after FID, the development phase, most probably approximately 40% of the value of the contracts will be done by Ugandans, as opposed to the 28 we had when we were in the exploration phase.
We have had companies grow, and these are live examples. I'm sure you have stories of people that you find companies that didn't know about oil and gas, they didn't know about the standards, they didn't know about the requirements, they didn't know about anything. They used to hear it as a myth that the oil and gas is for the few, for the rich, for the known, for international companies. We have seen that demystified through the incubator, and companies have been able to participate in tenders, to win some tenders, to train their people to be able to participate in this complicated industry as it seemed then before the incubator. So that's one of them. But also people and companies attaining certification. They have understood the importance of certification, the highly technical demands of the industry, and have chosen the route of certifying their company policies, certifications in HSE, certifications in all other requirements for their businesses and for their products as a result of the knowledge they've picked from the incubator. The authority has been about sectoral linkages, that let's have other sectors fit into the oil and gas sector and not be abandoned. And one of the key sectoral linkages that we've been talking about is the agriculture sectoral linkage. And the incubator has been strong in developing agricultural solutions providing training towards agriculture and having farmers get ready to participate through the aggregation, through improving of their standards, and that has been key, and we've seen good results there. We are working with them on undertaking other various studies to help us in that sectoral linkage, including housing and others, that we can make sure that the oil industry acts as a catalyst for other sectors to pick up from and be able to expand and grow, feeding off the oil and gas industry.
If we can do this amazingly well, I think we can see more local businesses participating in the oil and gas sector. And that is, of course, supporting the whole premise around local content.
Known as a top-tier safari destination, Tanzania boasts of one of East and Central Africa's most robust economies. The country is making deliberate strides to establish its place not just in tourism, but in business. Nowhere is it flexing its economic muscle more than in developing its largest port, the port of Dar es Salaam. The Port of Dar es Salaam, the principal port of Tanzania, handling about 95% of the country's international trade, is also the fourth largest port on the African continent's Indian Ocean coastline, strategically connecting neighboring land-linked countries of Malawi, Zambia, Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, and parts of eastern DRC to the Middle and Far East, Europe, Australia, and America. The government of Tanzania, with support from global partners, continues to work unrelentingly to make the port of Dar es Salaam a harbour so efficient that it becomes the route of choice for East, Central and Southern Africa. We are investing heavily in size, speed and smart technology. Expansion in size and capacity has been the key element of focus over the last 10 years. Initially designed with a total quay or landing length of 2,600 meters, 11 deep water berths, and the ability to handle 13 million tons of cargo a year, Tanzania embarked on the Dar es Salaam Maritime Gateway project, focused on expanding the capacity of the port to handle at least 30 million tons a year by 2030.